The clock above my kitchen window ticked softly, the way it had for more than 20 years. Each tick was a memory, one beat for laughter, another for loss. Outside, November air pressed cold fingers against the glass, and the last leaves of autumn scraped along the porch like whispers trying to get in. I always loved this time of year. The house felt quieter, slower. Soup simmered on the stove, the smell of thyme and bay leaf curling through the air. It was the smell of home. But lately, home had stopped smelling the same. Michael and Lisa had grown distant, like two shadows that shared the same light but never touched each other. And me? I had become the ghost haunting my own kitchen. I stirred the pot slowly, listening to the gentle bubble of the broth. It was a rhythm I knew by heart. 3 stirs clockwise, 1 counter, pause to taste. That was George's way. My late husband used to say, "Cooking is just another kind of prayer, Eve." He was right, but prayer only works when there's someone listening. The back door opened sharply. Lisa's heels clicked against the linoleum. "Still cooking?" she said, setting her parcel down. Her tone wasn't curious. It was tired, the kind of tired that comes with unspoken disappointment. I smiled over my shoulder. "Almost done, dear. Just letting the flavor settle." She opened the refrigerator and exhaled loudly. "You didn't use the new stock cubes I bought, did you? Those ones are low sodium." I shook my head gently. "No, sweetheart, just the old-fashioned broth. It tastes fuller that way." Her voice rose, brittle as glass. "That's the problem, Evelyn. Everything you do is old-fashioned." I wanted to laugh, to tell her that old-fashioned was another word for tried and true, but the words stayed behind my lips. Instead, I said softly, "Would you like to taste it?" She rolled her eyes. "No thanks, I'm watching my salt." I nodded. Silence settled again, heavy and uncomfortable. When Michael came home later, he smiled at me the way busy sons do. Halfway, distracted, but kind. "Smells good, Mom," he said, kissing my forehead before loosening his tie. "It's your father's recipe," I told him. "I thought you might like it tonight." He grinned faintly. "You never run out of soup, huh?" "Soup and stories," I said, chuckling. Lisa entered again, her perfume sharp, her face tight. She stood behind Michael, arms folded. "Actually, I was going to make pasta. I wish you'd told me you were cooking." "Oh, I didn't mean to interfere," I began, but she cut me off. "It's fine," she said flatly. "Just, next time, check first." Michael rubbed his neck awkwardly. "Come on, Lisa, it's just soup." "Yeah," she said, eyes narrowing, "and she makes it every single night." Dinner was quiet that evening. The clinking of spoons was louder than conversation. Lisa barely touched her bowl. Michael kept his eyes on his plate. I ate slowly, pretending not to notice. When the meal ended, I started to clear the table. Lisa stood, crossed her arms, and said, "You know, you don't have to cook every day. It's not your job anymore." I looked at her and smiled, not because I was calm, but because I didn't trust myself to speak without trembling. "I just like keeping busy," I said. "Busy is fine, but you don't need to remind me how things were done in your day." Michael opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. The silence hurt more than anything she said. The next afternoon, I tried again. I thought maybe I could ease the tension with food, my quiet language of peace. I chopped vegetables with careful rhythm, humming softly. Lisa came in while I was seasoning the pot. "What's that smell?" she asked sharply. "Just soup again," I said gently. "It's cold today, I thought—" Her eyes flicked to the stove. "You added sugar again, didn't you?" "A pinch. It balances the salt." Her hands flew up. "No, you'll ruin it." I reached for the ladle, smiling faintly. "Taste first, dear. You might—" But I never finished. The ladle slammed against my head, hot broth splattering my wrist. Lisa's voice rose like thunder. "Who cooks like that? Useless woman!" For a heartbeat, everything froze. The clock, the air, even the sound of soup boiling. Michael was in the living room. I saw his silhouette over the couch. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just turned the volume of the television higher. That silence screamed louder than Lisa ever could. I placed the ladle on the counter and said quietly, "You'll burn it if you leave it like that." Then I walked out of the kitchen. I didn't cry, not yet. Tears need safety, and I no longer had any. That night, I sat in my small room upstairs, listening to the creaks of the house. Every sound reminded me of what I'd lost: the warmth, the laughter, the sense that I belonged somewhere between these walls. I thought of George again, his voice calm and patient. "Eve, when life turns bitter, stir it slower." I whispered back into the dark. I tried, George. I really did. My hand went to the family recipe book, its cover worn smooth by years of love. I opened to the page titled Harper Family Soup. The ink had faded, but I could still read his handwriting. Add kindness first, everything after. That was the moment I knew. Tomorrow, I would leave. But before I could close the book, I heard footsteps outside my door. Lisa's voice, soft for once. "Evelyn?" I froze. She lingered in the hall for a moment, then walked away. No apology. No anger either. Just emptiness. Sometimes that's worse. Later that night, I went back to the kitchen one last time. The pot sat on the stove, untouched, the soup now cold and thick. I picked up the ladle, wiped it clean, and placed it beside the torn page of the recipe book. Then, slowly, I tore the rest of the book in half. The sound of paper ripping was small but final. When Michael rushed in after hearing the crash of the pot tipping over, I looked up from the floor and said quietly, "I tore it. You won't need it anymore." His face paled. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I think I'm done cooking here." He reached for me, but I stood and walked past him. My voice was steady, but my heart trembled. "Take care of each other," I said softly. "That's the only recipe that matters." That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a small suitcase, a few dresses, my Bible, and George's photograph. As I zipped it closed, I felt something lift inside me. Not joy, not even peace, but release. The kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone to listen. Before dawn, I left a note on the kitchen table. A home should stay warm, even when the soup turns cold. I placed the ladle beside it. The first light of morning slipped through the curtains, touching the metal with a quiet shine. Then I walked out the front door and closed it gently behind me. The air outside smelled of frost and beginnings. The house was still when I woke that morning. The faint light of dawn filtered through the lace curtains, painting the walls in soft gold. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. The kitchen, the living room, even the hallway, all of it held echoes of laughter, chatter, and the warmth of hands held across the table. And yet, for me, it had become a hollow stage. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded over one another, staring at the photograph of George on the nightstand. His eyes, gentle and full of patience, seemed to look right through me. I whispered his name softly, almost as if speaking aloud would make the world around me real again. "George, I don't know how much longer I can stay here," I murmured. My hand brushed the edges of the suitcase I had placed beside the bed the night before. I had not slept much, though the bed felt empty in more ways than one. Sleep never came easy when your heart was full of both love and sorrow. I began to pack, slowly, reverently. Each item I placed in the suitcase carried a memory. My favorite shawl, the one George had bought for me that winter when he proposed. My Bible, worn at the edges, the pages frayed from years of devotion. A few neatly folded dresses, nothing fancy, but each a remnant of moments I had shared with Michael and George. George's photograph, smiling as he held Michael in his arms the day he came home from the hospital. As I packed, memories began to flood in, uninvited yet welcome. Michael as a toddler, with chubby hands reaching for the pot of soup, giggling every time I let him stir. George kneeling beside him, teaching him how to taste the broth, how to feel the balance of salt and sugar. The kitchen had once been alive with so much joy. And now? I paused and pressed my hand to my chest. It hurt, this sudden realization that all those years of love, of care, had been met with indifference, even cruelty. Lisa's voice echoed in my mind, sharp, angry, full of resentment. "Who cooks like that? Useless woman!" I shook my head slowly, tears welling in my eyes. Not just from the strike, but from the betrayal of silence. Michael's refusal to speak up, to defend me, to even notice. That silence had been louder than any insult, heavier than any blow. Yet, as I folded another dress, I realized something. My dignity, my sense of self, could not remain trapped within these walls. I had spent so many years giving, bending, sacrificing, and now I had to choose myself. I walked to the living room and paused at the window. The world outside was just waking up. A thin layer of frost clung to the grass, and the street was empty, quiet except for the distant crowing of a rooster from the neighbor's farm. I could almost imagine George walking beside me, holding my hand, whispering, "Evelyn, love is not measured by the weight of a ladle or the sound of words spoken in anger." The house felt different in the early morning light, softer yet strange. The walls had witnessed too much tension, too much pain. I realized that leaving wasn't an act of surrender, but an act of survival. I moved through the rooms, each step deliberate, careful not to stir the remnants of the life I was leaving behind. I touched the counter in the kitchen, the same one I had polished so many times, and my hand lingered over the ladle. The memory of it hitting my head made me flinch, yet I knew I would carry it with me in spirit, not in anger. I paused in the living room, staring at the couch where Michael had sat, pretending not to notice. I thought of all the times I had wished he would see me, truly see me, as both his mother and as Evelyn, not just a fixture in the house, a caretaker of meals and memories. "Michael," I whispered, though he was not there to hear me, "I hope one day you understand. That silence, that is the heaviest burden a person can carry." By mid-morning, the suitcase was packed. I had left a small note on the kitchen table beside the ladle. "A home should stay warm even when the soup turns cold. Love, Evelyn." I stepped back and took a long, steadying breath. The house was quiet now, holding its breath along with me. The air smelled faintly of thyme and bay leaf, the remnants of yesterday's simmering soup. I ran my fingers along the counter one last time and pressed a gentle kiss to the ladle. Then I made my way to the door. The sunlight was brighter now, spilling across the porch steps, catching the frost like diamonds. For a moment I hesitated. I could hear Michael stirring inside, the faint clink of dishes as he moved about, oblivious to the fact that I was leaving. I closed my eyes, thinking of George. His calm voice, his warmth. "Evelyn, sometimes leaving is not giving up. Sometimes it is the first step to finding your peace." I opened my eyes, gripped the suitcase, and stepped outside. The cold bit at my cheeks, but it was invigorating, a promise of solitude, of freedom, of new beginnings. The bus stop was a few blocks away, but each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of the suitcase, but because of the life I was leaving behind, the kitchen, the family, the years of memories. And yet, it felt right. As I walked, memories continued to crowd my mind. Michael as a small boy, asking endless questions about the soup, about life, about everything. George teaching him patience, love, and the subtle art of seasoning. How life, like soup, required balance, care, and attention. I thought of Lisa, too. Not just her anger, but the hurt behind it, the insecurity and fear. I realized she too was trapped, carrying her own wounds from a childhood of harsh words and unmet expectations. Perhaps one day she would understand. The bus arrived with a hiss, and I stepped on, suitcase in hand. The warmth inside was comforting, yet distant, a reminder of the life I had temporarily left behind. I looked out the window as the bus pulled away from my street. The house shrank in the distance, the frost glinting in the sunlight. I didn't look back. I knew that true home was not a building, but the warmth and love carried within. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stirring of peace in my chest. Not happiness, that would take time, but the quiet dignity that comes from choosing oneself, from refusing to let bitterness define your remaining days. The bus took me out of Maplewood and toward the lake, toward the quiet sanctuary I had chosen for myself. St. Catherine's home, a place where the elderly lived in gentle rhythm, surrounded by quiet gardens and soft laughter. I had visited once when a friend's aunt stayed there. I remembered the smell of fresh bread, the calm that settled like a gentle hand on your shoulder. I thought of the coming days. I would be alone at first, yes, but solitude could be a kind friend. It could give me the space to heal, to breathe, to remember who I was outside of the walls of that house. And perhaps, one day, even Michael and Lisa would understand. As the bus rolled along, I closed my eyes and imagined George beside me, holding my hand as we walked along the lakeside path. The sun was shining, the water glimmering, and the breeze whispered in soft tones, "You are free, Evelyn. You are enough." A tear slid down my cheek, and I smiled softly. It wasn't happiness yet, not completely, but it was something else, something precious. Relief, acceptance, the knowledge that leaving, sometimes, is the first act of love you give yourself. I had packed the suitcase, but I had also packed the memories. I carried them gently, lovingly, as one carries fragile glass, aware of their weight, but treasuring their beauty. And in that quiet ride toward the lake, toward solitude, I felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the simmering of my heart would once again be warm, not bitter. Perhaps the soup I had left behind and the love I had poured into it would find its way back to those I had loved. And perhaps, in time, even silence could become a language of peace. The bus hummed along the winding roads, carrying me farther away from Maplewood, farther from the kitchen that had once been the heart of my world. Outside the window, trees bent under the weight of frost, their bare branches etching delicate patterns against the pale sky. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. It was quiet, yes, but in that quiet there was an invitation, a space for me to breathe again. When I arrived at St. Catherine's home, I stepped off the bus with a mixture of apprehension and relief. The building was stately, built of red brick and ivy that clung stubbornly to its walls like memories refusing to let go. Windows glimmered in the morning light, revealing glimpses of residents moving slowly through halls, carrying the rhythms of their days like sacred rituals. A kind-faced nurse, whose hair was streaked with silver, greeted me at the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper. Welcome," she said gently. "We've been expecting you." I nodded, managing a small smile. "Thank you. It's different here, but peaceful." "You'll see," she replied. "Everyone finds their own rhythm." Inside, the air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and the faint perfume of chrysanthemums. The walls were adorned with photographs, some sepia tones, some recent, of smiling faces, families, and pets. The lounge had plush chairs around a fireplace, and a soft hum of conversation drifted from the windows. I was shown to my room, a modest space with a window overlooking the lake. The water reflected the morning sun, soft ripples forming silver threads across its surface. I placed my suitcase on the bed and lingered at the window, letting the serenity wash over me. It was strange. The stillness here was different from the suffocating silence at home. Here, silence was gentle, healing. I spent the first day wandering the halls, hesitant but curious. Residents smiled politely, some stopping to introduce themselves. "There's always someone with a story to tell," said a woman named Margaret, leaning on her cane as she shuffled toward me. Her eyes were bright, mischievous, in a way that reminded me of youth. "And there's always someone who needs a listening ear." "I suppose that would be me," I said softly. Margaret chuckled. "You'll find your place, dear. Everyone does. It just takes a little time." Later, in the lounge, I watched a man named Walter teach a younger resident how to fold a paper crane. I noticed how delicate his hands were, trembling slightly with age, yet precise and careful in every motion. There was a quiet dignity to it, a sense of purpose even in the smallest acts. I realized then that this would be my new rhythm. Not the loud, demanding life I had left behind, but a gentle, deliberate one. That evening, I unpacked my few belongings and sat at the small desk by the window. I opened a notebook I had brought along, the cover plain, the pages empty, waiting for words I didn't yet know how to say. I began to write letters I would never send. One to Michael. "My dear boy, I have left the kitchen and the home not because I no longer love you, but because silence became heavier than words. I hope that one day you will understand the weight of kindness and the courage it takes to carry it." Another to Lisa. "Child, anger and frustration are like spices. Used in excess, they can burn the heart. I hope you learn to taste life gently and to forgive yourself for mistakes you may not even realize you have made." And one to George, though he had been gone for years. "My love, I am learning to walk again without you beside me. The soup still simmers in memory, and I carry the warmth you left in every spoonful, in every heartbeat. I am safe now, and I am healing." I folded the letters carefully and placed them in the drawer. No one would ever read them, yet writing them felt like exhaling after holding my breath for decades. Days turned into a slow rhythm of small gestures. I began helping in the dining hall, stirring soups for the residents, sharing stories of George and Michael, listening to the tales of others who had lived full, complex lives. There was Eleanor, who loved knitting but had lost her sight gradually over the years. I guided her hands over the stitches, and together we created patterns that told stories of resilience. There was Harold, a retired teacher, who played chess alone at first, but soon welcomed me to sit across from him, moving pieces with quiet strategy and gentle words. There was a quiet dignity to it, a sense of purpose even in the smallest acts. I realized then that this would be my new rhythm. Not the loud, demanding life I had left behind, but a gentle, deliberate one. That evening, I unpacked my few belongings and sat at the small desk by the window. I opened a notebook I had brought along, the cover plain, the pages empty, waiting for words I didn't yet know how to say. I began to write letters I would never send. One to Michael. "My dear boy, I have left the kitchen and the home not because I no longer love you, but because silence became heavier than words. I hope that one day you will understand the weight of kindness and the courage it takes to carry it." Another to Lisa. "Child, anger and frustration are like spices. Used in excess, they can burn the heart. I hope you learn to taste life gently and to forgive yourself for mistakes you may not even realize you have made." And one to George, though he had been gone for years. "My love, I am learning to walk again without you beside me. The soup still simmers in memory, and I carry the warmth you left in every spoonful, in every heartbeat. I am safe now, and I am healing." I folded the letters carefully and placed them in the drawer. No one would ever read them, yet writing them felt like exhaling after holding my breath for decades. Days turned into a slow rhythm of small gestures. I began helping in the dining hall, stirring soups for the residents, sharing stories of George and Michael, listening to the tales of others who had lived full, complex lives. There was Eleanor, who loved knitting but had lost her sight gradually over the years. I guided her hands over the stitches, and together we created patterns that told stories of resilience. There was Harold, a retired teacher, who played chess alone at first, but soon welcomed me to sit across from him, moving pieces with quiet strategy and gentle words. There was a quiet dignity to it, a sense of purpose even in the smallest acts. I realized then that this would be my new rhythm. Not the loud, demanding life I had left behind, but a gentle, deliberate one. That evening, I unpacked my few belongings and sat at the small desk by the window. I opened a notebook I had brought along, the cover plain, the pages empty, waiting for words I didn't yet know how to say. I began to write letters I would never send. One to Michael. My dear boy, I have left the kitchen and the home not because I no longer love you, but because silence became heavier than words. I hope that one day you will understand the weight of kindness and the courage it takes to carry it. Another to Lisa. Child, anger and frustration are like spices. Used in excess, they can burn the heart. I hope you learn to taste life gently and to forgive yourself for mistakes you may not even realize you have made. And one to George, though he had been gone for years. My love, I am learning to walk again without you beside me. The soup still simmers in memory, and I carry the warmth you left in every spoonful, in every heartbeat. I am safe now, and I am healing. I folded the letters carefully and placed them in the drawer. No one would ever read them, yet writing them felt like exhaling after holding my breath for decades. Days turned into a slow rhythm of small gestures. I began helping in the dining hall, stirring soups for the residents, sharing stories of George and Michael, listening to the tales of others who had lived full, complex lives. There was Eleanor, who loved knitting but had lost her sight gradually over the years. I guided her hands over the stitches, and together we created patterns that told stories of resilience. There was Harold, a retired teacher, who played chess alone at first, but soon welcomed me to sit across from him, moving pieces with quiet strategy and gentle words. There was a quiet dignity to it, a sense of purpose even in the smallest acts. I realized then that this would be my new rhythm. Not the loud, demanding life I had left behind, but a gentle, deliberate one. That evening, I unpacked my few belongings and sat at the small desk by the window. I opened a notebook I had brought along, the cover plain, the pages empty, waiting for words I didn't yet know how to say. I began to write letters I would never send. One to Michael. My dear boy, I have left the kitchen and the home not because I no longer love you, but because silence became heavier than words. I hope that one day you will understand the weight of kindness and the courage it takes to carry it. Another to Lisa. Child, anger. The mornings at St. Catherine's home had settled into a rhythm I had grown to cherish. The lake outside my window glimmered silver under the first light, mist curling gently above its surface, like a veil between the past and the present. I would sit at my desk, pen in hand, and let my thoughts drift onto paper. Some letters were never meant to be read. Some words were meant for release, a quiet confession to the walls, to the wind, or perhaps to the memory of those who had gone before us. I picked up one letter to Michael, the paper soft beneath my fingers. I had written it countless times, adjusting sentences, scratching out words, trying to find the exact tone, gentle but firm, filled with love but not guilt. Michael, my dear, I have left the kitchen and the house not because I no longer care, but because silence has become heavier than words. You were once a boy who clung to my apron, eyes wide with curiosity. Do you remember the nights we read stories before bed? I hope you carry some of that wonder still, even in the middle of adult burdens. As I wrote, my mind drifted back decades to a younger version of myself, to a life before grief and disappointment had softened the edges of my heart. I remembered the early mornings with George, him in his robe, slippers dragging along the floorboards as he poured coffee while I prepared breakfast. His laughter was a soft, constant melody that accompanied our years together, and every corner of that house was touched by the warmth he carried. And then there was Michael as a child, running around with the same careless joy, leaving small trails of crumbs behind him. I remembered how he would grab the ladle from my hands, insisting he stir the soup, and how George would kneel beside him, guiding his tiny hands. "Balance, Michael, balance in everything," he would say, "even soup." I smiled, though the memory carried a pang of longing. Those were the days before bitterness, before anger had clouded Lisa's voice, and silence had become my burden. Lisa. Writing her letter was harder. I hesitated, watching the words form on the page. Her anger had cut me deeply, but beneath that anger I sensed a fear, a loneliness she had carried since childhood. Lisa, I know you are frustrated, and I know you feel the weight of responsibility. But anger is a spice that burns the heart when used too often. I do not write this to chastise, but to remind you that love is patient, even when it is tested. I hope that one day you may see that the harsh words you speak to others are often the echoes of the words spoken to you when you were young. As I wrote, my mind wandered to her childhood, to fragments Michael had shared in casual mentions. A mother too busy with work, a father absent more than present, and a household where mistakes were met with criticism rather than guidance. The girl who had grown into my daughter-in-law had never learned to feel safe expressing herself. The anger was a shield, not a weapon. I thought of the little Lisa I imagined, small hands clutching a worn doll, eyes searching for acknowledgement that rarely came. No one had taught her how to taste life gently, how to season words with patience and kindness. And now she was standing in my kitchen, lashing out at the very warmth I offered. Understanding does not excuse cruelty, but it softens it. And I felt the first glimmer of that softening in my heart as I continued to write, folding each letter carefully before placing them in the drawer. I paused, pen hovering over paper, and let my thoughts drift further back. I remembered the first time George kissed me. Not the wedding day, not the formal ceremony, but that quiet moment in the kitchen, with the sun pouring through the lace curtains, the smell of fresh bread filling the room. His hands had been gentle, firm, and reassuring. That memory had carried me through decades, even after he was gone, even after Michael had grown, and even after the silence had become my burden. And I remembered the first time I met Lisa. She had been eager, young, uncertain, a child still clinging to the edges of childhood habits. I had tried to welcome her, to guide her as best I could, offering the warmth I had learned from George, from my mother, from my own childhood. But life, as it often does, had layered years of tension over the foundation of goodwill. The more I reflected, the more I saw the parallel paths we had walked, she and I, two women shaped by love and loss, by expectation and fear. Our conflict, though painful, was a reflection of shared human experience, the need to be seen, the struggle to protect one's dignity, the longing for understanding. That evening, I took my letters down to the small bench by the lake. The water mirrored the gray sky, ripples forming soft lines across its surface. I laid the letters aside me and watched, imagining them drifting gently into the hands of Michael and Lisa, imagining them reading the words with eyes softened, hearts opened. Of course, I knew they would never reach them. That wasn't the point. The act of writing, the act of releasing my thoughts and feelings was enough. It allowed me to confront my own emotions, to place them outside myself, and to feel the first stirrings of peace. I traced the letters with my fingers, imagining the warmth of the kitchen, the sound of Michael's laughter, the sharpness of Lisa's words. and I felt a strange serenity. Pain had not vanished, but it had shifted from a sharp ache to a quiet weight that reminded me of my own strength. Back in my room, I placed the letters carefully into the drawer. The pen I had used lay beside them, ink-stained and familiar. I touched it lightly, remembering every word I had written, every memory I had relived. I thought again of Lisa, of Michael, of George, of myself, and for the first time in a long while, I realized that anger and resentment were not permanent residents of the heart. They could be eased, softened by understanding and reflection. And perhaps one day, the letters would find their way to the right eyes, in the right hearts. Until then, they rested with me, a testament to the quiet dignity of confronting one's emotions and a reminder that human connection, though often flawed and painful, was never beyond reach. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the soft lapping of water against the lakeshore. The house was calm, the other residents quiet in their rooms. I held a cup of tea in my hands, its warmth seeping through my fingers, through my chest, soothing the aches of memory and loss. And I whispered softly into the dark. Perhaps one day Lisa will understand. Perhaps Michael will remember. And perhaps I will forgive, fully as I have always tried to teach. The letters remained unsent, yet in their quiet presence I felt a connection to the past, to the family I had left, and to the life I was slowly, carefully rebuilding by the lake. And in that quiet, reflective night, I allowed myself to hope. I had been sitting by the lake that morning, watching the mist curl over the water, thinking of Michael and Lisa and the silence that had stretched like a wall between us for far too long. I wondered if they would ever understand, if they could ever see what I had carried in my heart, the quiet labor of love I had poured into every meal, every day, every choice I had made for them. The jar rested on the counter when I had left it, small, unassuming, yet heavy with meaning. I had packed it carefully, tied with a note in my familiar handwriting. To whoever finds this jar carries more than flavor. It carries patience, love, and care. Use it wisely, and always remember, kindness is the true seasoning of life. I imagined Lisa finding it first. I could see her small, sharp movements as she lifted the jar, turning it in her hands, curiosity mixed with stubbornness. Would she understand the message behind it? Would she taste more than the spices, more than the seasoning I had crafted? Would she taste the years of devotion and quiet sacrifice? And Michael, he had always been gentler, slower to anger, though sometimes blinded by his desire to avoid conflict. I imagined him reading my notes, feeling the weight of what I had done quietly for years, the mortgage, the household bills, the invisible labor that had kept the home afloat. Would he finally see it, not with blame or resentment, but with the awe of a son realizing his mother's devotion? I could not know for certain, but I trusted in the quiet magic of small acts, of patience, of love left unspoken until the moment it needed to be seen. Hours passed, and I imagined the moment of revelation. Lisa's fingers trembling as she unfolded my note, her eyes widening as she read the words. I felt the tug of guilt and regret curl through her, and I imagined her heart softening, realizing that anger had been a shield, not a weapon, and that she had been blind to the quiet warmth of my care. I thought of the ladle, the soup, the countless meals I had prepared with precision and patience, now understood perhaps for the first time. Even the smallest things mattered: a pinch of salt, a simmered broth, the way I had kept the house running quietly, efficiently, lovingly. Michael would look at the records, I imagined, old receipts, payments made to keep the mortgage current, all without fanfare, without expectation. And then he would understand, as he always eventually did when the truth was laid bare. His eyes would soften, his jaw relax, and the warmth of comprehension would fill him. I smiled quietly at the thought. My heart felt a subtle lift. Years of silence, years of unspoken words were finally bridging the distance I had feared would never close. That evening, I pictured them together in the kitchen. Lisa holding the jar, tasting the broth with careful reverence. Michael standing beside her, letting the moment speak its quiet truths. I imagined the aroma rising, filling the house in a way it had never done when I was the one moving hurriedly through the space. And in that imagining, I felt a gentle satisfaction. Not pride, but the quiet contentment that comes when love is finally recognized. Even though I was miles away, by the lake, I could feel their hearts shifting. The walls of misunderstanding and resentment bending under the weight of truth. And I knew in that moment that the smallest jar, a handwritten note, the carefully measured spoonful of seasoning, could reach further than any confrontation, further than any words of reproach. I whispered into the quiet evening, softly, as if the wind could carry my voice to them. Taste carefully, my children. Love slowly. Forgive freely. And remember, kindness is always the truest seasoning. I pictured Lisa finally understanding, finally kneeling to see the depth of care I had carried, and Michael realizing that my silence had never been neglect, but a quiet shield protecting them both in my own way. My heart ached with the longing to be there, but I also knew that love, even at a distance, had a way of bridging itself across time and space. By nightfall, I returned to my room, the lake dark and still outside my window. I felt a warmth in my chest, a promise of reconciliation yet to come. Even miles apart, even in absence, my legacy of patience, devotion, and quiet love had begun to speak. And for the first time in weeks, I slept with a sense of hope, fragile, tender, but unmistakably real. I lay awake that night by the lake, the moonlight spilling softly across my small room, reflecting off the water in delicate silver streaks. I could not sleep, not entirely, though the house was silent. My thoughts wandered back to Lisa, and I imagined her tossing and turning in her own bed, the weight of realization pressing on her chest like a heavy quilt. She had tasted the seasoning, read the note, seen, perhaps for the first time, the quiet devotion I had poured into every act of care, every meal, every day I had stood in that kitchen without complaint. And yet I knew that recognition came with a price, guilt, shame, and the awakening of truths she had buried deep inside herself. I remembered her as a young girl, as Michael had described her, fragile yet stubborn, hungry for approval from a mother who had little warmth to give. I had often seen those same traits surface in our interactions, her anger and impatience not born of malice, but from wounds that had never been healed. As I lay there, I traced her journey in my mind. How often had she mirrored the very behavior she had condemned in me? How often had she lashed out in fear, in insecurity, not realizing the hurt she carried forward was the hurt she had once known herself? I thought of my own years with George, of how I had carried patience and kindness as armor, not against him, but against the world. I understood then that love is often an exercise in quiet endurance, in giving without expecting, in forgiving without being asked. And in that understanding, I felt a deep empathy for Lisa, not excuse, but recognition. Her sleepless nights, her racing thoughts, the remorse that would chase her like shadows across the walls of her own mind. I felt it all as if it were my own. I imagined her flashbacks, the sharp words of her mother, the tense silence at the dinner table, the constant pressure to perform, to appear good enough. The same fear that had driven her to criticize me now circled back to haunt her, and I could almost see the tears she fought to hide. And yet, through the remorse and regret, I sensed a spark, the beginning of change. She was beginning to understand that cruelty often hides behind pain, that impatience can be a shield for insecurity, and that love, when nurtured, can heal what bitterness has broken. I whispered softly into the quiet room, imagining my voice reaching her across the distance. Lisa, my dear, understanding comes slowly. It begins with seeing, then feeling, then forgiving. Do not be afraid to confront your own heart, even if it trembles. I thought too of Michael, how his gentleness had often been overshadowed by his desire to avoid confrontation. I knew that together they could start breaking the cycles that had defined their family for generations. But the first step had to come from recognition, from reflection, from empathy, qualities that Lisa was only just beginning to grasp. I remembered my own mistakes, my own moments of frustration, the times I had wished for patience I did not yet possess. And in that reflection, I felt a quiet satisfaction. My life, though filled with trials and grief, had provided the lessons they now needed. My love, even in absence, could still guide them toward understanding. The night stretched on, the water outside still and calm, the soft calls of nocturnal birds echoing in the distance. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel the full weight of hope and responsibility. Though I was far from the kitchen, far from the house I had once kept so meticulously, I could sense the slow shift in hearts I loved. Lisa would awaken to her own reflection, confront the patterns she had inherited, and begin the work of change. And Michael, always steady, would walk beside her, providing the gentle balance she needed. I whispered one final thought into the night, as much for her as for myself. Pain is never wasted if it teaches us compassion. Mistakes are never permanent if they guide us toward understanding. And love endures, even when unrecognized, even when tested. By the time dawn crept across the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and silver, I felt a quiet relief. The echoes of regret would not vanish overnight, but they had begun to transform into something more profound: empathy, awareness, and the slow, patient promise of change. And I, Evelyn, could rest a little easier, knowing that the seeds I had sown with care, patience, and quiet devotion were finally beginning to take root. The day Michael arrived, I felt a nervous flutter I hadn't expected. I had imagined him many times in my mind, walking up the stone path, hesitating at the doorway, the weight of years and misunderstandings pressing against his shoulders. And yet, when the knock came at my door, my heart leapt in a way it hadn't since George had passed. I opened the door to find him standing there, tall and steady, but with a certain tension in his shoulders that betrayed the seriousness of his visit. His eyes met mine, a mixture of apprehension, longing, and something I recognized immediately: the desire for connection, for understanding. "Mom," he said softly, the word carrying years of distance and unspoken words. "Michael," I replied, my voice steady but warm. "It's good to see you." He stepped inside, removing his coat, his hands lingering on the fabric, as if unsure whether to release the weight of the past entirely. I gestured for him to sit, and we settled into the small lounge, the window open to let in the gentle afternoon light. The lake shimmered outside, peaceful and forgiving, as if it, too, understood the delicate moment we shared. He spoke first, hesitant, searching for words. "Mom, I never realized how much you did for us, for the house, for me, for Lisa." I nodded slowly, letting him speak without interruption. "I know," I said quietly. "I never expected recognition. I did it because it had to be done, because love is often quiet, because sometimes patience is the only way to survive the weight of family." Michael's eyes glistened, and I could see the tension beginning to ease. "I think I've taken that for granted. All these years, I didn't notice the sacrifices, the care, the little things you did. And I know Lisa, she's struggling with that too." I reached across the small table and laid my hand over his, feeling the warmth and the familiar shape of his life within mine. "Michael, love is never lost. Even when unrecognized, even when misunderstood, it shapes the heart. And sometimes it takes time, years even, for someone to truly see it. He nodded, swallowing hard. I want to understand. I want to do better. Not just for Lisa, but for us, for you. I smiled gently, thinking of the long road ahead. You will, my son. Change begins with awareness, and awareness begins with patience, with listening, and with remembering that the ones we love are human, flawed, fragile, and yet capable of growth. Michael's eyes softened, and I could see him thinking of Lisa, of the moments of conflict, of the ladle, of the jar of seasoning, and the small note I had left. He understood now, even partially, the bridge that had been quietly built between generations. We spoke for hours, though the conversation was not rushed. I shared memories of George, of the kitchen, of the long days of care and devotion. I told him stories he had never heard, about moments of patience, small acts of love that had seemed insignificant at the time, but were, in truth, the foundation of our family. He listened quietly, absorbing each word, each memory, each gentle lesson. And I could feel the tension in his chest slowly release, replaced by comprehension, reflection, and a desire to reconcile, not just with me, but with himself, with Lisa, and with the legacy of love we all shared. As evening fell, the light softened over the lake, and I felt a small, tender hope blooming in my chest. Michael rose to leave, pausing at the door. He turned to me, his eyes full of quiet determination. Mom, thank you. I don't know if I can ever truly repay you, but I promise I will try. For Lisa, for us, and for everything you've done. I smiled, squeezing his hand gently. You don't need to repay me, Michael. Just carry love forward. Be patient, be kind. And remember that understanding is often the greatest gift you can offer another. He nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt a bridge forming. Fragile, yes, but strong enough to bear the weight of generations. And as he walked away down the stone path, I watched him, feeling a warmth that came from the quiet hope of connection, the promise of reconciliation, and the enduring power of patience and love. That night, I sat by the lake, listening to the gentle lap of water against the shore, reflecting on the visit. For the first time, I felt a sense of relief, a sense that the seeds of understanding I had planted so long ago were finally beginning to grow. Even in distance, even in silence, love had a way of reaching across hearts, slowly, tenderly, and with enduring patience. I had spent the morning by the lake, the soft sunlight bouncing off the water in gentle streaks of silver. The house was quiet, but my heart hummed with anticipation. Today, I would send something back to the family, a final gesture of love, of closure, and of hope. The recipe book lay open on my lap, its worn pages smelling faintly of thyme, rosemary, and memories. Each recipe was more than instructions for a meal. They were small fragments of my life, moments of care and patience distilled into ingredients and steps. Every page carried whispers of laughter, of holidays, of quiet evenings when the family gathered around the table and the world outside ceased to matter. Beside the book was a final letter I had written in my familiar, precise hand. I read it over once more. Dear Lisa and Michael, this book has held more than recipes. It has held my love, my patience, and the memories of a family bound by care. Use it wisely. Cook with your hearts as well as your hands. Remember, love is the true seasoning of life. I send this back not to bind you, but to release you into understanding, into the tender realization that patience and kindness outlast anger and haste. May these pages remind you of the love that has always surrounded you, even in silence. With all my heart, Evelyn. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the cover of the book. I had no doubt that Lisa would open it with trembling hands, that her eyes would fill with tears, and that for the first time she would taste not only the flavors of my kitchen, but the essence of my heart. The postal service carried my gesture across town, and I imagined her receiving it. The slight rustle of the paper as she unfolded the letter, the familiar scent of the recipes mingling with the air, the pause as she recognized the weight of what I had sent. I could see her tears forming, warm and unashamed, as she flipped the pages carefully, lingering over each dish, each note I had scribbled in the margins. I imagined her in her kitchen, the familiar sounds of chopping and simmering blending with the rhythm of her heartbeat. She would measure ingredients slowly, carefully, adding them not just to the pot, but to her awareness, a newfound patience, a tenderness that had been absent before. And then the moment I had longed for. She tasted the soup. A spoonful, hot and fragrant, filled her senses, and I imagined the tears spilling freely, her chest rising and falling with the release of years of misunderstanding and anger. Michael would be there too, quietly observing, letting her feel without interruption. He would finally understand the small gestures I had made all those years, the effort that had often gone unnoticed. Together, they would begin to heal, slowly, gently, like the first tender shoots of spring after a long winter. I reflected on my own life as I watched the imagined scene unfold in my mind. Love does not demand recognition, but it does hope for understanding. Patience does not cry out for praise, but it does hope to soften hearts. And forgiveness? Forgiveness is the quiet miracle that turns hurt into growth, misunderstanding into connection. I felt a warmth in my chest, a glow that came not from the sun or the water, but from knowing that my family would finally see the truth of my care. They would taste it, remember it, and allow it to reshape the way they moved through life, the way they spoke to each other, the way they carried their hearts. The lake reflected the evening sky as I placed my hand on my chest, whispering softly into the quiet room. May love always be your guide. May patience temper your hearts. May forgiveness flow as freely as water. And may the flavors of care never be forgotten. And in that moment, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a rebirth. The family I had nurtured from behind the stove, from the quiet corners of our home, would carry forward what I had sown: love, patience, and the knowledge that kindness is always the truest seasoning. By nightfall, the house by the lake was still, the water calm and reflective. I knew the healing had begun. Michael and Lisa would taste it, feel it, and slowly, tenderly begin to embody it. And I, Evelyn, could rest knowing that my final gesture had done what words alone could not. It had returned love to its rightful place, alive, understood, and shared once more.
The invitation had arrived quietly in the mail, yet it carried a weight heavier than words could hold. Michael's handwriting was careful, deliberate, almost tentative. "Mom, we'd like you to come home for Thanksgiving. Lisa and we've realized how much we've taken for granted. Please join us. The house isn't the same without you." I held the note in my hands, feeling the tremor of emotions I had not expected. Pride and pain, hope and hesitation, they all stirred within me. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet joy arose, the chance to bridge the silence, to feel the warmth of the home once more, and to witness the first steps towards reconciliation. I packed a small bag, my fingers brushing over the familiar recipes I had carried with me, folding them neatly into my satchel. The train ride was long, but I did not mind. I spent the time reflecting, imagining the family sitting around the table, the aroma of roasted turkey mingling with the soft warmth of forgiveness. The house greeted me as it had for decades, though with subtle differences. Lisa had arranged flowers in the living room, and the scent of bread baking drifted through the hallways. The atmosphere was tentative, cautious, but the underlying warmth was unmistakable. I entered the kitchen first, my heart tightening as I saw Lisa at the stove, stirring a pot of soup with careful reverence. Michael hovered nearby, glancing at me with a mixture of pride and apology in his eyes. "Mom," Michael said softly, "thank you for coming." I smiled, a gentle curve of my lips. "It's good to be home," I replied. The words carried more than just physical presence. They carried acceptance, peace, and the willingness to rebuild. The meal was prepared together, each of us contributing, each action layered with subtle acknowledgement of past mistakes and newfound understanding. Elisa added spices with care, guided by memory and my gentle suggestions, while Michael set the table, his movements deliberate, infused with respect. I watched them, noting the way Lisa paused after each step, as if savoring not just the act of cooking, but the meaning behind it. Michael's eyes met mine occasionally, and in those glances I saw recognition of the quiet sacrifices, the endless patience, and the love that had kept our family intact all these years. Finally, we sat together around the table, the dishes steaming before us, the aroma of home filling every corner. I looked at their faces, at the softness replacing previous tension, and I felt a gentle release in my chest, a sigh that carried decades of longing, regret, and hope. We ate slowly, speaking in soft tones, laughter mingling with the warmth of the meal. Elisa reached across the table, placing a hand on mine, her eyes glistening. "Mom, I'm sorry," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of remorse and awakening. I squeezed her hand, feeling the honesty, the transformation of anger into understanding. "I know, my dear, and I forgive you. Love is patient, even when tested. And now, we have the chance to move forward." Michael joined in, his voice steady but tender. He said, "We all do. Thanksgiving has never meant more than it does today." The meal became more than nourishment for the body. It became a symbol of reconciliation, of patience rewarded, and of the enduring power of love. Each bite, each glance, each shared story rebuilt the bridges that anger and misunderstanding had frayed. After dinner, I stepped to the window, gazing at the fading light over the backyard where I had spent countless hours teaching Michael, guiding Lisa, and nurturing the family. The air smelled of autumn leaves, roasted turkey, and the soft hint of forgiveness. I whispered quietly, more to myself than anyone else. "This is why we endure. This is why we forgive. This is why love, even when quiet, is never wasted." And in that moment, surrounded by the family I had nurtured, I felt the long journey of patience, endurance, and devotion crystallize into a simple truth. Love always finds its home, even after years of silence. We lingered at the table, sharing stories and laughter late into the evening. The wounds of the past, though remembered, no longer held the power to divide. Instead, they reminded us of how far we had come, of the growth, the awareness, and the gentle healing that had begun. And as I finally retired to my room that night, I felt a profound peace. The home was no longer a place of tension and anger. It was alive with connection, understanding, and the enduring warmth of family. For the first time in many years, I slept with a heart unburdened, knowing that love, patience, and forgiveness had truly taken root.
The years that followed were gentle, unhurried, as if time itself had slowed to honor the quiet life I had led. The lake reflected the seasons with calm consistency, the water lapping softly against the shore as I moved through my days with a measured rhythm, a rhythm of thought, of reflection, of quiet gratitude. I watched Michael and Lisa from afar now, knowing that the seeds I had sown, Patience, care, and the understanding of small acts of love were blooming in ways I had longed to see. I would visit them sometimes, sharing quiet afternoons in the kitchen, offering guidance only when asked, and delighting in their growing confidence, their laughter, and their care for one another. Often, I would sit in my favorite chair by the window, the sunlight spilling across the floor, and remember the long path that had brought us here. The ladle, the jar of seasoning, the letters, each a small step toward reconciliation, each a quiet testament to endurance and understanding. And in those moments of reflection, I realized that silence had been as important as words. It had been the space in which love matured, the pause in which understanding could take root. I thought of Lisa stirring the soup with care, Michael setting the table with patience, and the laughter and conversation filling the home, echoes of lessons learned, echoes of my heart poured into theirs. It was a continuation of the life I had nurtured, the legacy I had left, a home alive with kindness, warmth, and respect. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the lake, I wrote one final note, not to be sent, not to be read by anyone, but to seal my reflections and offer peace to my own heart. Love is always present, even when silent. Patience is never wasted. Kindness endures beyond words and beyond time. May the warmth of care always find its way home, and may those who come after know that the truest flavors of life are found in understanding, empathy, and gentle hearts. I placed the note in my drawer and let it rest. I no longer needed recognition or acknowledgement. The world was as it should be. Michael and Lisa carried my lessons forward in their actions, their words, their laughter, and the way they treated the world and each other. Even as my hair silvered and my steps slowed, I felt no fear of time passing. My life had been full of trials, love, mistakes, and triumphs. I had seen the family I nurtured stumble, hurt, and grow, and I had guided them quietly, leaving them with tools far more lasting than any recipe or instruction. Sometimes at dusk, I would sit by the lake, the wind soft against my face, and smile. The legacy of patience, of quiet endurance, of love expressed in small acts, that was eternal. The family home, the kitchen, the jar of seasoning, the letters, the laughter, all would continue long after I was gone, carrying forward the lessons I had lived, that love, kindness, and patience are the truest inheritance anyone can leave. I could feel the world around me moving, children growing, life unfolding, and yet I rested in a profound calm. My story was not only mine, it had become part of theirs. Every meal cooked with care, every gentle word spoken, every act of patience would echo my heart. And in the quiet of the evening, when the house was still and the lake mirrored the sky, I whispered softly to myself, to the water, to the memories. This is the taste of silence, the flavor of a life lived in love, understood in patience, and remembered in kindness. And with that, I rested, the world calm, my heart full, knowing that love had endured and that its legacy would never fade.